Welcome everyone to the next Alumni Career Webinar, Negotiating a New Work-Life Balance with Hallie Crawford. I'm Maura Sweeney, Director of Alumni Career and Professional Development at Holy Cross, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar offered exclusively for the Holy Cross community. We'll be together for about an hour today, and after the formal presentation, there'll be time for you to submit questions and for us to have a nice Q&A with Hallie. So you can submit questions using the Q&A function or using the chat, whichever is easiest for you. This presentation is recorded, will be made available to all participants in a few days. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker. Hallie is a certified career coach, speaker, author, and national career expert with over 21 years of experience. Her company, Create Your Career Path, is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. She is regularly featured in the media, Forbes, CNN, Money Magazine, Wall Street Journal, and has undergraduate and graduate degrees from Vanderbilt University and the University of Illinois. With over 1,500 success stories, her team of coaches and resume writers help professionals find jobs that make them want to jump out of bed in the morning and go to work. Congratulations, that is a lot of success.
Thank you.
With that, I will hand things over to Hallie. It's great to have you here today.
Thanks, Maura. I really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for being here today too. Our running joke during COVID was jump out of bed in the morning to walk down the hall to go to work versus a long commute, pros and cons to all of that, which obviously is what we're going to be talking about today. So there's been a lot going on, obviously due to COVID and everything else. And the advice that we are going to give you all today should be relevant, and this is part of what we can address in the Q&A part as well at the end, but should be relevant whether you're working from home the whole time still, if you're back to the office full time, or even in the hybrid model, because we're finding that balance is really now even more so what it looks like for you. It's very unique to each person. So just know that everything we're going to be talking about will be relevant for all situations. So as Maura said, we've been coaching and training for over 22 years. We absolutely love what we do. We've got resume writers and coaches on our team. And I'm really passionate about talking about this particular topic today, obviously because it's so timely. And so many of our clients have been discussing with us these issues, like how to go back to the office and feel comfortable. We've had clients say completely different things to us. Some people have said, I really want to go back to the office because I miss that social interaction, etc. Whereas other people have asked us, how do I tell my boss I never really want to see them in person again, and deal with that. So everyone can feel understandably very, very differently about the hybrid model, the working from home, etc. And this is again why you need to think about life balance as it works for you, not some preconceived notion of how it should be. And I think given the pandemic, that people have realized that even more, which is great. So here are the steps that we want to go through today on this next slide here. We want to talk about external definitions, ways that we tend to kind of define ourselves externally versus internal priorities, so that you can start to think about those things like shoulds that you might have in your mind that you can shed if they don't work for you. We'll talk next about our life balance wheel, which is a really great tool to help people start to think about the different areas of their life and what balance looks like in each of those areas. We'll talk about defining fulfillment, which is a really critical component to life balance, because if we're not fulfilled in general, and when we make more of an effort to take actions during the course of our day that would be fulfilling, our lives will feel like they're in greater balance, even more so. And then finally, we'll talk about establishing meaningful but also realistic goals, because we all know that we can't just go to our boss and announce to them what we want our new schedule to be necessarily. And then we will talk about boundaries to be setting and ways to really tangibly navigate things differently as so much has changed. And at the end, we are going to talk about action items, but also do some Q&A as well. So just keep that in mind. As we progress here, if anyone would like a copy of the presentation, there is a website that you can go to download the slides. In the chat box, actually, I'm going to put our email address in there, and you can ask for the webinar PowerPoint slides that way as well. So I'll do that in just a second. All right, so here is what some people have felt like. Some of our clients are like, okay, this working remotely is hard on me. It's stressful. It's very difficult to work around kids, whatever is going on. And as all of us, as we can understand, longer working hours are difficult for us. And I think obviously one of the downsides of the pandemic and working from home, at the very beginning, especially when we didn't understand as much how to establish boundaries, that our work and personal lives were totally blended. And it was like, how do we manage this? And understandably, it makes us more anxious. We can, have a lot of emotional kind of difficulties when things are too blended. And when we don't have that separate kind of delineation between our personal and professional lives. The other thing is that due to COVID, when people are working from home, they tend to work more hours. Now, in some cases, I would definitely say that they might be working different hours and maybe more at night or whatever it is. But just in general, and I'm sure you all can kind of relate to this. I was reading something about this the other day, not just about, if you look in the middle here, about people feeling burned out in general. But the thing that was so interesting to me, which I have experienced, is this blurred sense of the passage of time. Like, I think that when we are working from home versus in office, it's like time just goes by and we don't have a sense of it. It's like we kind of get like in our own zone. And I think there could be pros and cons to that, but I think there's a lot of cons to that blurred passage of time, if you will, because again, we'll work more than we normally would otherwise because we don't have to drive home or whatever it is. And not having that sense of time can be something that's difficult. So just by the way, as we're talking, one of the good things that can help us have greater balance and understand and be mindful of where we're spending our time during the course of our work days, whether it's from home, hybrid, or whatever, is to like use timers on your phone, for example, like an alarm for the end of your workday even, or for an alarm for your lunch hour. Whereas when you were at the office, you didn't have to do that necessarily, but we have to be, or it can be helpful to be more mindful of the passage of time by having a clock right in front of us, for example, or different alarms set up on our phone to get up and walk around for a minute, lunch, et cetera, et cetera. So these are some of the things we want you to be thinking about over time as it relates to that particular issue. Let's take a look at this next slide. So the good news is obviously why we're here today, that just because things have changed with where we're working, it's more about just kind of learning to do things differently. It's not that we can't overcome this. It's getting back in touch with our internal compass, so to speak, to help us define what balance means to us. And what we use as, or have our clients think about as their internal compass, so to speak, is their values. And we're going to talk about how to identify and be clear on your values here in just a few moments. But this is one of the things we want you to be thinking about too, in addition to like the time blocking, is what values are you honoring in your day-to-day life currently and how we can kind of amp that up. Now, the other good news here, just really quickly on the right-hand side of this slide, is that employers are listening to us more and more. So even though I know that I was joking at the beginning a little bit about you can't just go to your boss and tell them what you want and this is your new schedule, yes, that's unrealistic in a lot of cases. However, what we are hearing from our clients is that employers are much more open than they ever have been, I think, to having these types of conversations. They will actually listen. You can ask for things much more than otherwise. We've had clients tell us they got their bonuses earlier in the year than they expected. And the employer just decided that because they were worried about turnover and people leaving. So you can ask for more these days, and we want you to take advantage of it. And then the final kind of item here on this particular slide, and then we'll keep going, is that life balance, as we said earlier, it is how you define it, excuse me, but it also is something that's fluid. And so you want to be careful of thinking of, okay, if my life looked exactly like this one perfect image, then it would be in balance and I just have to keep it there. That's like way too intense. And that's almost more stressful to think about it that way. So you want to think about your balance is fluid. your days might be different, or they will be different based on work and kids and obviously everything else. And so it doesn't have to just look like one thing every single day. It could look one way during the week or at the beginning of your week, and then a different way on the weekends, etc. So think of balance as being fluid during even the course of your week, in addition to as your life and circumstances change personally and professionally. Okay, so it is very fluid, and don't put that pressure on perfection either. Now let's talk about this idea of a compass for a minute. We talked about just a second ago values, and how those can be a really good kind of indicator of whether your life is in balance or not. And obviously a compass is used for orientation and direction. And what happens to us, we get off track, and this happens to everybody, it's normal, but we get off track when there's some sort of deviation that occurs in our lives. And it could be intentional deviation. So for example, if you decide to get a new puppy, or you are, have a new child, or you're planning your wedding or something like that. Those are intentional deviations, so to speak, where your life is going to be a little bit more out of balance, but you've chosen it. It's a good idea to be mentally prepared for those things and figure out a way that you can, work your way through them, but that would be intentional. There's unintentional things though too, like COVID, obviously, where we were thrown into this remote environment. Some people are better at dealing with that than others because they're better at creating structure and boundaries, etc., versus other people, it was very difficult. So as much as we possibly can, even though unintentional deviation will sometimes happen, what we want to do is be intentional about our deviations as much as we can. And even when there's something that happens to us, so to speak, try to own that a little bit and find ways to be intentional about, okay, how do I work around this and kind of work within this new box, so to speak. So really quickly, we'll talk here about our first step. And this is what we call with our clients external definitions, and the way we define ourselves, sometimes externally a little bit too much based on the job title that we have, the place that we work, the salary that we make, what our strengths are, anything that in the way that we define ourselves that's kind of attached to external things. What we want to start to think about is making sure that those things are okay with us, okay ways to define ourselves. Because what we found, especially during COVID, is that in some cases our jobs can change, or we might lose our job or be furloughed or whatever. And so people realized that they needed to, define what life balance means to them from the inside out as much as possible, but also not be too attached to external things like external values, norms, or those types of things from society, etc., because those things can change. So what our first step that we'd like you to think about, and these are some homework assignments, I'm a coach, I always assign homework, sorry, is to think about tonight, like, after dinner, before you go into bed, whatever it is to just kind of ponder and think about, okay, how do I define myself as a person in my personal life, but also how do I define myself in my professional life? And are those definitions working for me? Am I okay with them? Am I too attached to any of those things maybe, and they could change and that could cause a problem? So we want to, number one, just be mindful of these external definitions and how we're defining ourselves professionally, and start to kind of remove or redefine ourselves professionally in a way that works better for us. Because if we can do that, we can start to move our lives, including our work lives, into better balance, if you will. And we want to set our schedule and our action steps and everything else to create greater balance according to, or have them aligned with, our internal definitions as much as possible. Now, I wanted to say something here just really, really quickly, because as we go through all of our action steps today, one of the things I want you all to know too is that although some of you may feel like my life is way out of balance and this is going to be a really hard task to like drive the car back, in the right lane, what we have found is actually that really small changes in your schedule and how you approach your day and how you approach different tasks or projects, they can actually have a really big result. And so the good news too is that with all of these action steps we're talking about, if you just try 2 or 3 of them, they can actually have a really big result and big impact in how you feel and your life being in greater balance. So just keep that in mind too, so that it doesn't feel overwhelming. Try 1 or 2 steps in the next several days that we're talking about today and see how it goes. And I promise you, you will have, more of an impact actually than you realize, even if they're kind of small tweaks. So what we're wanting to do here with this discarding of external definitions is we want to have our sense of self and our sense of our balance in our lives come from the inside out, because as we said, external circumstances can change. So if we could do this first poll here, Maura, that would be great, because we're really curious to see, as you've started to think about this, as we're talking about it, if you feel like, I do have some ways that I might be defining myself externally that may not be working for me as well as I would like. And I think I might need to adjust some of those things in order to find the right kind of way to establish balance. And I'm going to type in the email while everybody is doing this for PowerPoint slides. So the email is in the chat box, everyone, if you want to get the PowerPoint slides after we're done today. We'll give you all a minute to complete this. And we feel that, just by the way, this is one of the most important first steps, because it's kind of like you have to do a self-assessment about what's going on underneath. And if you don't do that first, you can make all the changes that you want to, phone alarms, blah, 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 whatever. But that's not, it's going to be like it moves the needle a little bit, but something is still off. It's not going to have the changes that you want. Ooh, a mix of both. Okay. Wow, that's 100% though. That's okay. Interesting. Okay, cool. Thank you all for saying that it's a mix of both. We want you to think about any internal definitions. We're going to talk about that next. Also, that may or may not work for you. So we'll get into that in just a second here. Okay. So here's the goal. Our goal, and this is kind of a visual image to help you think about like life balance being fluid and everything else we said, is that we would like our external lives to be like this Mobius strip where there's a harmony between what's going on for us in our internal values and priorities and what balance looks like for us, and that is mirrored, so to speak, or flows in between our external lives as well. Okay, so we're looking for that harmony between your internal and external world, so to speak. And the more you are clear about what your career and personal values are, and are doing things during the course of your workday, whether it's within work or even outside of work, where you're honoring those values, you're going to get more of this kind of harmony, so to speak. Okay. So some action steps that you could take to get more in harmony, so to speak, before or in between your external and internal world is to think about, as we said before, where you think you're defining yourself incorrectly or externally. And a good thing to start to think about now as it relates to life balance and what that looks like for you is to answer the quick question of, what does success mean to you? What does success mean to you at this point in your life? And based on everything that's happened with COVID, because we are getting a ton of people that will contact us and say, you know what, success used to mean this to me, but now it means this. It's flexible hours. It's spending time with my kids, more. It's having more meaning in my work and feeling like I'm working at an organization where I believe in what they're doing. So that question is a great one to work on and think about. You can interview other people for a second and ask them what adjectives come to mind when they think of you, and that can help you get a sense of, what your greatest strengths are and how you can leverage those towards greater balance. And finally, it's a great idea to think about what you want your workday and week to look like, and because of what you've learned from COVID now. And also think about what's fulfilling to you and what fills you and what you're passionate about, and can you honor those things more regularly? That's one of the good things about either the hybrid work environment or working from home, is in some cases we do have at least a little bit more flexibility. So let's talk next about step number 2. And this would be to work on, after you've identified some of these definitions and how you're starting to define success differently, and maybe where things are kind of, there's some inconsistencies in what you want and how things are right now. A really good way to make this even more tangible for yourself is to complete the life balance wheel. So if we take a look at that on our next slide here, this wheel is something that you can change the different categories, et cetera. But basically what you would do, and we'll explain kind of three or four ways to kind of work through this. A life balance wheel is a really good kind of quick snapshot of all of the areas of your life, whether it's your career, your finances, your health and wellness, family and friends, et cetera. And it just shows in one place on a scale of 1 to 10, for example, where you are in each of those areas and kind of the areas that you consider the most important components in your life. Okay, so the different ways to leverage the wheel, and we just really like the wheel model, I guess, because it's a visual reminder of, okay, these are all the areas that are important to me, and you can even like post it on your office wall, etc. But the first thing that you want to do is you can adjust the categories in the wheel. So these are the suggested categories that we have people usually fill out, but you can always change them or adjust them or rename them in a way that works better for you, that will remind you of balance so that you can remember really quickly and kind of memorize it, so to speak. So for example, finances, career, fitness and health, etc. So the first thing you want to do is create your own wheel and use the categories that make the most sense for you and rename them. And then as part of this, the second thing that you want to do is rate the current state. So in our example, it's on a scale of 1 to 10, and it can be a scale of 1 to 5, whatever works best for you. But the first thing you want to do is rate the current state. Where am I at right now in terms of balance in my life in each of these areas? And in an ideal world, we want it to be up close to a 10 or at a 10, or, you know, as close as we possibly can. The third thing that you want to do is define what your future state, what you would want that state to be in that area, so to speak. So for example, if your fitness and health ideal state at a 10 is I weigh this much, or, you know, I'm cut and ripped, which I'm not, so that's why I'm kind of laughing about that. But those types of things, you want to define your future state. And if you can journal about it a little bit, that's even better, because it's really nice to have a vision attached to each of these areas. And then the last thing that you want to do is kind of make an assessment once you've defined your future state, identify what the action steps are that you can take 1 week at a time, give or take, or once, you know, a couple of things a month, whatever it is. The areas that are lowest for you, we usually want people to tackle those first. You may choose a different area of the wheel that is more important to you than others, though, for example. And let me go to another example of the wheel here so I can show you this while we're talking. So this person, for example, might say, I want to tackle, you know, significant other first, or they're like, no, I'm okay with that right now. It's not quite as important to me. I want to focus on fitness and health, or, you know, my career, whatever it is. So choose that 1 or 2 areas that are the most important for you for whatever reason to start working on right away, and start to come up with some action steps from what we're talking about today to start to move those up the scale. And keep in mind, as we said earlier, we're not looking just for, oh my gosh, everything has to be perfectly at a 7 and I'm going to be really attached to that. That again, it can be fluid, and it's more about you being at choice. And this is kind of my last thought for the life balance wheel as we move to our next step, is what we have found with our clients too, is that it's less about everything being perfect necessarily, and more about them feeling like they're at choice in the areas that they're, you know, are important to them, and how they're spending their time. And that can make a huge difference versus feeling forced into something or whatever it is. Okay. So there's 2 ways, and let me just go back here for a second. There's 2 ways to do your life balance wheel. There's this nice, colorful, pretty one, or there's the other one that we just showed you. And let me just point out too, the reason why there's these lines here is the idea with the wheel is after you've ranked yourself where you are now, if you draw lines between those numbers, the concept is if this was a wheel on your car, it would be like a really bumpy ride. So you want to move each area up the scale at least a little bit, so it's a little bit smoother. Okay, I'm not going to talk about this right now. Let's keep going. Let's talk about step number 3. And step number 3 is a really important piece because this goes back to, as we were talking about earlier, about defining what's most important to you internally first versus external definitions. The numbers are still really high. I would say pretty much every year, give or take, and especially during COVID, these numbers went higher. There is a survey that comes out or report that reports on employees' satisfaction or engagement at work. And unfortunately, too often, people are not as engaged as they should be or we would want them to be. And still, we're hovering at about 51%. They're not really as engaged at work. And I think those numbers have gotten a little bit worse during COVID for obvious reasons. So we want to be really conscious and mindful of defining fulfillment to us, again, internal versus external definitions. So we talked a few minutes ago about one way to start to define what fulfillment looks like to you is to define what success means to you at this point. But the second thing that we want you to think about too is to start to identify and think about what your top values are. And we'll explain how to do that in just a second. Values are basically our guideposts to fulfillment. We have found over the past several years, which we are thrilled about, that more and more of our clients seem to have a sense of what their values are or might be professionally, which is great. I just think people are thinking about these things more frequently, which is good. But it's really important when you're considering work-life balance to be considering your values, because that can guide or drive which of those areas of the wheel are going to be most important for you to work on versus which don't matter as much to you. Our values basically are things that are incredibly important to us, so much so that they're bigger than just ethics or morals or tasks that we have to perform. Values are things that mean a lot to us in that if we make choices in our lives according to our values, we are going to be more fulfilled. So, for example, one of my values is authenticity, and my whole brand of my business is based around that. And I tend to be the type of person that is more of a direct communicator. I appreciate it when people are really real with me. And honestly, when I go to a party, which, we have done a little bit now after COVID or post-COVID sort of, I'm usually talking with one person for a while about some really deep stuff, and they're going to share some deep stuff with me. So the way that you can start to think about your values, one way to think about them is choices that you tend to make, topics that you talk about when you talk with your friends, things that you're drawn to when you read or watch TV, etc. And another way that's a great way to define your values is to think about a peak experience in your life. We like people to work on or choose a personal experience for them and think about what was cool about that experience to them, what was meaningful, what was important, a little bit less about the details of the experience itself, but like what was neat about it. If it was a trip to Europe, for example, were you more into the planning of it in advance and, choosing the restaurants and deciding how long you were going to spend at each place? Versus another person is like, woo, let's just go for it and see what happens, and is more about going to see the right art museums or whatever it is. Two different sets of values. So a peak experience is a great way, if you journal about that for a moment, even maybe share it with a friend or family member, you can start to identify, okay, what was important to me or cool about that experience? Those are some clues to your values as well, okay? So when we think about values, keep in mind that, and actually Maura, if we could do this second poll here, that would be great, because we are curious how many people feel like they know what their top 5 career values are. The goal here, everyone, is your values tend to operate subconsciously because they're just kind of part of who we are. And that's fine. But our goal is to help you have them operate at a more conscious level so that we're all making more conscious decisions aligned with and according to our values. And if we do that, our life is just going to naturally be in greater balance as a result. So we'll give you a moment to work on this poll. And I think that as you're thinking about this, the way to think about the values with the balance is that there's the external kind of categories, if you will, and the action steps we want to take to those things, but we also have to make sure that our values are reflected in our action items and in the things that we're trying to achieve related to balance, because otherwise those things will feel more hollow, so to speak. So I'm really curious about the answer to this, because like I said, I think the good news is that we found it more. Maybe I have a few, but not 5. Good. Okay, so that's good. It's just music to my ears. That's fantastic. One of the things we want to say, and let me actually go to this next slide here so you can kind of noodle on it while I'm talking, is that remember that your values can change over time. And so even for those of you who feel like, I know my values, okay, that's really good. You want to, every 6 months, give or take, to think about how you define your values, because the way you define them may have changed a little bit. And the priority of your values may have changed as well. And even just a subtle shift in terms of the priority of your values can make a really big difference in how you're living your life. So make sure that you're reevaluating them at least every 6 months for the definition and the order. One way to think about a balance for you professionally and personally, even like professionally kind of inside of your job, is to use our career model. And I'll just introduce this really quickly. So values go in the fulfillment box. And then we've got, am I working on enjoyable tasks every day that I feel not just fulfilled, but I'm liking it? Am I leveraging my strengths regularly? Am I leveraging classes or education and experience that I want to leverage? Some people may not care about this quite as much. Am I in the right fit job wise and culture, work environment wise, based on my personality? And compensation is obviously important too. So sometimes there are clues to, and let me go to this next slide, there are clues to where your professional life is out of whack and out of balance. And this model can help you figure out what's going on versus feeling like things are all over the place. I don't know what's going on. It just feels out of balance and I don't know why or where. It's also a great idea to use this model to rank on a scale of 1 to 10 where your job is now in terms of, okay, I'm satisfied with each of these areas. And then it can help you identify the inconsistencies and where things might be a little bit out of whack. Because for example, if you're not leveraging your strengths on a regular basis, you're not going to feel fulfilled. And enough of our clients are telling us that, for example, the work environment isn't the place they want to be anymore. They might be in the right job in terms of the role. They might really like the people, et cetera, but they may not believe in the organization anymore or feel like the values of the organization don't reflect theirs. So this model can help you within your actual job, what may be going well and what is not going as well to help you achieve that greater balance too. Let's talk next about step number 4. And this is about setting meaningful, like we've talked about, attached to your values, and also realistic goals though too. So let's say you go through the model and you're like, okay, well, I'd like these 3 or 4 things to be changed. We want you to also think about, okay, what are the things that are realistic? And let me not ask for everything at once. How about I talk to my supervisor, for example, about making some slight changes to my schedule first, and then talk about how can I leverage my strengths a little bit more, and offer up my skills for different projects or tasks or whatever it is. So doing those types of things and ensuring that your career is in the right place, so to speak, with all of those areas of the model will help you ensure that you're staying in balance kind of long term too. So a couple of ideas here, or more than a couple, so we'll go through them for just a second. It's a really good idea to attach whatever your life balance goals are to your career values and your personal values. They will therefore be more meaningful to you, but you'll be even more, they'll have a greater impact, and you'll be even more kind of motivated to achieve them as well. So attach goals to values as much as you possibly can. Some ideas could be like, okay, and I put these down here because these are my examples. So some people might be like, are you kidding me? These are your examples. But I feel better when my office is clean, and like to take a break from my computer during work and just go like put the dishes away or whatever. I've worked from home for a long time, and there's something for me, it's probably a little bit of OCD, but it's part of one of my values too, is like things being in order and all of that. And guess what? When I do things like this, I find that it gives me time to process whatever was going on work-wise, and I'll come up with an idea. So time during your lunch to clean things up or whatever, like that makes me feel like I'm in greater balance. I also end my workday early because I pick my son up from school every day. I work on the weekends pretty regularly. And you know what? I know some people would be like, that is wrong. That's not how, no. For me, that's how balance looks for me. And that's okay. So again, it's really about, don't go with just the shoulds because someone says you're not supposed to do that. It's more about you. Like that's balance for me. I am actually more productive and creative sometimes on the weekends. And then I've had that time with my kiddo during the week. So again, your goals should be unique to you and there's no judgment about them. And it's, again, whatever your personal values are, you can insert them during the course of the day. And I feel like if I do something as simple as, you know, keep things clean or take a few minutes to do that, I feel better. And it's not like I spent 2 hours doing it. Okay. Second thing that we said was attaching your goals to the ideal career model as well. Remember that balance isn't just about time management and boundaries. It is also about honoring your values. It's about making sure you're leveraging your strengths, working on tasks that are enjoyable, or maybe even tasks that are harder at the beginning of your day, because that's when you're fresher versus the end of the day. Some people may say it's the opposite. So it's also about where and when you spend your time too, but not just about like managing it exactly. It can also be about like the perspective you take on a given task, so to speak. And then finally, it's a really good idea to, we all want our clients to have a strategic career plan for the rest of this year and even for 3 years and 5 years out. And one of the things, regardless of what you do with like a career plan or performance review that you're working towards, even if you keep this part to yourself, that's fine, but add like life balance as a line item in your plan, because we need to do that in order to be effective and successful in the long run. And as we said a little bit earlier, small steps can have big results. Test out different small strategies, see what works, and adjust it if needed. So don't try to, you know, have it just be one way and slog at it. Like try one thing for a few days and see what happens, and then make some adjustments as needed too. Okay. And as part of this, when we're talking about attaching goals to the ideal career model, one other thing, if anyone here today feels like their career is really, really out of whack and they're wondering if maybe I need to make a career change or something like that in order to achieve greater balance, one of the things that you can do is write a quick kind of vision statement, or think about if each of the areas of this model were at a 10, what would that look like? And how can I move towards that? And does it mean that I have to make a change or a move within my organization or outside of it? And having a goal for each of these areas of the model, that can be a big part of, again, establishing the right balance for yourself. So before we go to our last step and then start to move to Q&A here, we are curious, I'm always curious about this strategic career plan. So we'll do this third poll here. How many people, even if you don't call it a strategic career plan and it's maybe not as fancy or formal, that's okay. But we are just wondering if anyone has a plan, and if you've already started by chance to incorporate elements of balance in there. My guess would be that some people have started to, because again, we've had so many people coming to us in the past 6 months and saying, I'm done, I need to have this, this, and this. So I'll be curious to see. I might be, you know, talking to a small set of people that are, you know, whatever, less happy, but we'll see. And again, as we said earlier, you can keep this to yourself if you think that's a safer bet, you know, than sharing it with your boss. But we have found that companies are paying more attention to it, which is good. There was a client that we were speaking with recently. He actually works at AT&T, and he was in their training and leadership, the director of training and leadership there. And he was applying for a new job, and it was called employee experience and engagement. And I was like, yay, you know, yay AT&T, because big, you know, company that's been around for a while, it's a whole new department that they're trying to do. So again, that's the good news. So how are we doing, Maura? Oh, perfect. Okay. Okay, so 25% say yes. That is better than I thought it would be. So that's awesome. 50% say no. So let's add those in for those people. And if you're not sure, 25%, use well, two things I'll say there. Use some of the tools and stuff we've talked about today, but you can email us if anyone feels like they need additional advice with what we're talking about today. There's a strategy session we're happy to do with you, a quick coaching call that you can do with me. It's also a chance to learn a little bit more about coaching, but we can help you kind of, fill that out and figure out what's going on there. Let's talk about step number 5 next, and then we'll get to our Q&A so we have enough time for that, which will be good. Okay, so our goal, probably most of us might love to just be sitting on the beach instead. So that's why we put that here. So moving towards that eventually. We wanted to talk about specific boundaries and specific action items that you could take to try to establish greater balance. So we've talked about kind of the esoteric concepts and ideas. These are tangible steps. So setting some personal limits for yourself that you don't even have to share with anyone, including your boss, that you're not going to work after a certain hour, or you're okay with checking emails at night, maybe for 20 or 30 minutes, so that you're less stressed when you wake up in the morning. I had this really kind of poignant experience a long time ago where I didn't check emails while I was on a vacation. And when I came back, I was more stressed than I was, before the vacation or during, or whatever the right thing is, you get it. And so now I actually check my emails while I'm gone, because that makes me feel better. I'm on top of stuff. When I get back, I'm still relaxed and I don't feel like there's this flood. So again, consider what is best for you and how accessible, for example, you're willing to be at different times of the day, and try to stick to a schedule. So time block your day, time block your week. I do certain types of calls on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and less of them on Tuesday, Thursday. I know that some of us don't have obviously as much control over our schedules, but as much as you can, try to time block things out. Identify when you're at your best and work on difficult projects during those times of the day, including if it's evening, if that's best for you. You want to, if your email is you're only going to check your email a couple times a day, and it's only during these times. Some of your other boundaries, like we said, you can keep some of them to yourself, but some others you may need to communicate to your boss when you need to have some downtime because you got to feed your kids before they go to bed, or, well, you shouldn't be working then necessarily. But again, like we said, it's about what works best for you. So you may want to communicate some of those boundaries to your boss and have a quick conversation about, does this work? Is this okay? In some cases, we can negotiate with our supervisor of, making sure that you're really clear on when and how you'd like to get your work done, what your deadlines are, how your supervisor wants you to communicate. If you're working from home and maybe you feel like that makes them a little bit nervous, what do you guys need to do to change things and make things a little bit better? Talk with your boss about the specific benefits, the things that you think will be positive about your proposed changes to your schedule or whatever it is. I feel like I'll be a lot more productive. I know I can be more effective and efficient this way. Can we try it for a week and see how it goes? So again, none of this has to be set in stone. You can ask for some changes and adjustments and say, can we test it for a few months and see what happens? And if you're in the situation where you're being asked to go back to the office and you're not totally ready to do that full time, are there places that they can compromise or you can compromise? Can you negotiate some flex time or whatever it is? And then finally, our last 2 slides here, make sure that if you are going back to the office, or even if you're not, that we make sure that we take that time to kind of unplug and recharge and take breaks. We talked about the blurring sense of time at the very beginning, and we need to create and set a good schedule for ourselves that it's set up on our own, especially if we're working remotely. And we need to get back to like taking a quick break, whether it's a lunch hour or a lunch half an hour or whatever. You may want to turn off your work email on your phone at night or silence it or whatever. If you're working from home and you still don't have a physical barrier for your home office, make sure that you do that. And one of the other things that we sometimes need to train our clients on, it's the last item here on the left, is that some people aren't as good about like knowing what to say to someone to like set a boundary. So you can have some kind of taglines that you say to certain people, maybe that talk a little bit too long or whatever it is, like, I've got to run. Thanks so much for your time. Can we pick this back up tomorrow or whatever it is? Like, we've even had clients write these things out and put them on their wall, and that's what they say. And they get in the habit of setting that time boundary, and it works really, really well. You just have to like write out what feels authentic to you and what you think will work. So I have an appointment, but I can look at this tomorrow morning. Is that okay with you? That type of thing. And then finally, let's start to go ahead and have Q&A as we just talk about these last few things. Go ahead and put some questions in the Q&A box or the chat box. It's a really good idea to get an accountability partner for these things, so they can check in with you and say, hey, did you take your lunch hour today? Oh, hey, how did it go with setting your alarm to remind you to get up and walk around for a minute or whatever it is? It's a great idea to get help and accountability from someone. It's a great idea to leverage technology for your downtime, like apps like Calm or time tracking apps are really good for like meditation and those types of things. And it's a great idea to find ways to connect with each other in a more meaningful way too, because we find that just helps us kind of get out of our own head too, and take the action steps that we need to take as well. Okay, so let's pause for a moment, and we would like everyone to get out pen and paper or whatever is best for you to write down one action step that you will take in the next week. Feel free to share that in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and we will answer any questions that happen to come through. And we've got a couple of ideas about action steps as well here. And hopefully this hasn't been too overwhelming. I know that I tend to share a lot of information because I love what I do and I get excited. Just think about like what one thing stuck out the most for you that really resonated, and take that one on, because remember we said it can be really big results just from these small changes.
Well, and it is a lot of really good information, but you've broken it down in such a way that it's a really, really great step-by-step to help walk us through.
Okay, good.
Yes. No, and I found myself wondering if you've seen, as you work with clients through these steps, is there a particular area where people tend to get stuck, where you find that you're spending a lot more time and really digging in with them?
Mm-hmm. It's a great thought. I think that usually they tend to get stuck on the last step, where it's the setting boundaries and actually like implementing the changes, because they just get busy and they put this as like a last priority. Like, I need to keep my job, right? Of course, so that's what we want. So it's that one, honestly, it's implementation. Like, a lot of them are great at the dreaming and like, oh yeah, this is what I want and all of that. And it's like taking it from that part to action can usually be the most difficult for people. And they just get overwhelmed with stuff, understandably.
Yeah.
It's a great question.
Well, and what's nice about that, since you talked about balance not necessarily kind of in one particular day, but balance over the course of a week or the course of a month, that to me got my head thinking about, okay, that's how I tend to structure my weeks. I look to see, all right, if today feels absolutely insane and I'm back to back to back to back, is there another day in the week where I'll get to recoup and catch up? And maybe, for any of you, if you feel like, oh, I might get stuck at that same spot of kind of putting things into action, looking at your week and seeing, where can I do one thing and where can I fit that in, to make it feel that much more possible to start to move forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. One of the things that we have had a lot of clients latch on to, and I use this as well, is trying to like time block their calendar on Friday for like an hour and a half or an hour or whatever, because then in the back of their minds, they know, okay, I've got that coming up. Don't freak out today because it's crazy because I know I have that.
Yes. Yeah. And I read an article, this was probably a month or so ago, that time blurring is real for me. So if it's real, it's real for anyone else, it's very real for me. I read an article sometime in the past 6 months. That's the best I can do. That talked about they started time blocking on Monday mornings because they realized no one wants to schedule a meeting on Monday morning. And so kind of in addition to Fridays where everyone is just looking for a break, Monday morning is another kind of magical time. It allows you to ease into the work week. And really, if someone's scheduling a meeting with you on 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, that should be a conversation that needs to be revisited because that should probably get moved.
Totally. It's very quiet for me on Monday mornings, to your point. Like, I'm not getting a flood of emails and all of that. It's so like that. So those are two really magical times, I think, Monday morning and like Friday afternoon. Because I kind of feel that way too, like a Friday afternoon, 4 o'clock meeting. Are you kidding? Like, so.
Yes, yes. Well, and another question for you around the idea of external definitions. And particularly when that comes, when you use that thinking about your work, because I think so many of us were given a title by our employer, and it's natural that we kind of latch onto that, and it does start to define us. And so I wonder if there are some strategies or some tips that you might have for people who are feeling like that, well, they don't know what else they would call themselves. What other definition would I use if not, I'm an analyst?
Right. Okay, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So you can still be an analyst, for example,
Mm-hmm.
but you want to think about like who's great at, XYZ. It's almost like if you write an elevator speech for yourself, then it takes it out of just like, this is who I am, like by job title. And it takes it into more like, these are some of my strengths that you could take anywhere. Or, and that's also kind of fulfilling too, to see and think about what the results are that you achieve for your organization or whatever it is. So it's okay to say that, but just don't have it be so attached to, at your current organization. It's a little bit more, bring in more of who you are as a person. Does that kind of answer?
Yes. Yeah. Because I think looking at it a little bit more holistically as what kind of analyst, or what's the type of work that you like to do? How do you do the work, to add more descriptors and more of that story to flesh it out.
Yeah. And the results that you achieve, like, and for what purpose, what's the kind of meaning or value behind it, that will help take it into more where it can be anywhere almost.
That's great. I know, I'm not sure if for anyone else who's on the call, but it's been interesting as I'm on LinkedIn all the time, constantly looking at people's headlines that they put on their profiles. And it really is a mix. I've seen a lot more people taking the approach of not necessarily listing their professional title, but adding descriptors like this and really giving them a little bit more leverage to describe themselves in more creative language, or the way that they see themselves as opposed to the way their company sees them.
Yeah, people are doing that. I see that too, actually. That's a really good point. And it's very engaging, like you're drawn to it. So I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. All right, great. Well, I know that we are close on time. So I just want to thank you so much. It's always a pleasure every time I get to partner with you. And I really, really appreciate how you've broken things down. I think you've made it really accessible for us, and eager to go and start to fill in some of the gaps. Oh, there's one quick question that's just scooted in before the time. Do you have any tips for people in essential positions that haven't left physical workplaces but feel the tension of working with others remotely? Balance has felt really different when pushing some of those work time boundaries, specifically responding to colleagues after hours when you've already put in a full workday. Oh,
yeah.
gosh.
Yeah, that's totally valid. I would try to see if there are ways to collaborate with them. And I'm not sure what your situation is, but if there's a way to try to set aside time during the day to collaborate with them, communicate with them, whether it's live, just quick phone call, maybe it's informal and doesn't have to be a set meeting, but to try to be more mindful of getting that done, shooting off a couple of emails to those people that work remotely or whatever it is. It sounds like it's bleeding into after hours, and maybe there's a little too much separation between those two. And maybe even you can talk to your supervisor or someone else, or even the people that work remotely, to say, hey, how can we work together a little bit better during the workday? Can we set some structured regular meetings or something like that, so that you're not then doing it later? So it's almost like you want to pretend that they're there live and get them fit in during the workday as much as you can. It's a great question.
Yeah, and I like the idea of if it's possible, and I know that schedules change all the time, but if there's a quick, every morning at 8 a.m. when we start the day, we're going to connect, what are the high level items, and kind of get it, maybe set the stage right away. I like that, because then other people won't schedule other meetings. You can have that dedicated time. But it sounds like communication is really and those boundaries.
Yeah, communication, boundaries, and being proactive about it, like thinking ahead and saying, okay, this week, when can I work with these remote people and fit it in my existing schedule so that I can make sure it's not. So being proactive, I think, too.
And I wonder, if in case there are other people who are also in the physical workspace who are encountering the same problem, if there's a way that you can work together or find a time to communicate as a group, whether, no one wants meetings for the sake of meetings, but really working together too, to try to solve that.
Like, are you having the same problem? What, any ideas? Let's brainstorm and get together. Yeah. If you can, leveraging other people, that's great. Thank you for that question. That's awesome.
Yeah, wonderful. Awesome. Well, Hallie, this has been absolutely fantastic. For everyone who is here, you'll see Hallie's email is on the slides in front of you. We also put it in the chat, admin@halliecrawford.com. If you have any follow-up questions, or if you want to get the slides, there's a survey that'll pop up at the end. So please share your feedback. We love feedback. And I hope that you all join me again for another Holy Cross webinar. Any questions, you can always direct them to me at msweeney@holycross.edu. Hallie, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you again.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone. Appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.